Hello again. There was a time when something about the lives of famous British Christians, the missionaries and hymn writers, such as David Livingstone, John Newton and John Wesley, were familiar to many people in this country. Children were taught about them during school assemblies and they featured in Ladybird books. These days, such men are suspect, especially those like David Livingstone and John Newton who spent time in Africa. Never mind that David Livingstone fought ferociously against the slave trade in Africa, his statue is now in the sights of the decolonisers. The case of John Newton, who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace, is even stranger. In the description to this video, I give a link to a thoroughly modern view about John Newton, which is taken from the website of the National Portrait Gallery in London. This is from a section on their site called Portraits, People and Abolition, about slavery of course. Scroll down to the bottom of the page to which I give a link and you will find Mary Seacole, needless to say, and a photograph of a black woman with a child supposedly taking part in an activity for children at the Portrait Gallery. This must surely have been posed by models, for I have never in my life seen a black mother and child there. But anyway, let's see what it says about John Newton. Born in 1725, John Newton spent the first 30 years of his life at sea, working as a sailor and rising to the rank of ship's captain. He was also closely involved in the slave trade, purchasing slaves off the coast of West Africa and working the transatlantic slave route. In 1754 he converted to evangelical Christianity after attending religious meetings inspired by the preachers John and Charles Wesley. Now children, can anybody tell me what's missing from this picture? No? Well, of course these days the life of John Newton is not as well known as once it was, which is why the National Portrait Gallery thinks it can get away with this. Let's look at another website, one which has no earthly reason to hide anything about John Newton, but which is a little more honest. The second link I give is to the African American Registry, which is a site for black children in the United States. What do they say about John Newton? He transferred to Pegasus, a slave ship bound for West Africa. The ship carried goods to Africa and traded them for slaves to be shipped as part of the Middle Passage in the Caribbean and North America. Newton did not get along with the crew of Pegasus. In 1745 they left him in West Africa with Amos Clow, a slave dealer. Clow gave him to his wife, Princess Pay of Sierra Leone, who abused and mistreated Newton just as much as she did her other slaves. Early in 1748 he was rescued by a sea captain sent by Newton's father to search for him. That's just as I remembered it. John Newton was a slave in West Africa for 3 years, a slave of a black woman. He was reduced to a pitiful state during this time, mistreated and starved. He wrote later that he had been the servant of the slaves. In other words, a white Englishman was kept in slavery with black slaves owned by a black woman in Africa for years. Now, why do you suppose that the National Portrait Gallery decided to leave this out of their own account? It's very simple. The true story of John Newton doesn't fit in neatly with the narrative which is now universally accepted about slavery in Africa in the 18th century. White people as slave traders? Certainly. As sailors? Yes, this fits in with colonialism neatly. White people as slaves in West Africa? Slaves belonging to a black person? That just sounds wrong. It is especially wrong because Amos Clow, the white slave trader, was married to a black African woman who herself owned slaves and helped supply her husband with slaves to be exported to the Caribbean. This is of course not how we like to see the history of the transatlantic slave trade these days. In this way, British history is being remodelled before our very eyes, and any inconvenient fact are being rooted out and disposed of where possible. It is very bizarre that to find an accurate account of the life of a famous British clergyman and hymn writer, we are forced to consult a black American source.